Our final speaker is Jonathan Schooler, and his talk is titled The Kite of Consciousness and Other Metaphors of the Mind. Let's welcome Jonathan.
Thank you. One of my favorite quotes is, theories are like toothbrushes. Everybody has one and nobody wants to use anybody else's. And I think that may be especially true for consciousness research. But today, instead of, I will be talking about theories, but I'll also be talking a lot about metaphors. And one thing that we're oftentimes encountering are mixed metaphors. We'll burn that bridge when we come to it, and so on. And oftentimes we are advised against mixing metaphors. But today I want to promote the mixing of metaphors. I want to argue that for complex issues such as consciousness, different metaphors offer sort of different angles onto the topic. And so rather than trying to constrain to a single metaphor, I'm going to introduce you to a whole lot. Actually, a number of them have already been introduced if you were here for Justin's talk earlier on. But some of the metaphors that you'll be encountering today include consciousness as a theater, consciousness as a conversation, consciousness as a mosaic photograph, where when you zoom in, you see that each pixel is itself a photograph, and that can then be zoomed in and see further pixels within those photographs. And then some fresher ones, consciousness as a dimension within a 3D space. And I'll also be talking about consciousness as going up a down escalator. And then, of course, you can anticipate consciousness as a multi-paneled kite. Okay, so here we go. Put on your seatbelts. We're going to go through a lot. So I'll go through this quickly because Justin already reviewed it, and hopefully many of you were here for that. We have a paper that came out recently called Hierarchical Consciousness, the Nested Observer Window, which introduced three sort of central metaphors, the theater, the dialogue, and mosaic tiling. Very briefly, the idea is that the mind is constituted of theaters, and each theater may in fact be a locus of consciousness. So one of the things about this model is the possibility that your mind may have multiple theaters going on, but the top theater, as Justin mentioned, is the apex. And the key thing that defines a theater is that all of its bits are essentially happening in entire synchrony. This is also aligned with a model with Tam Hunt, in which you basically have a integration of everything because it's all happening simultaneously in a particular locus of activity. Then we have a dialogue where you have the we have coupling between one source and another source. A conversation is a perfect example of a dialogue, but the idea is that the mind itself is constituted of these windows that are communicating with each other. You can think of this as the left hemisphere and the right hemisphere, different, the amygdala, or even internal family systems. And then the third is, and this is perhaps the most original of the three, is the mosaic tiling idea, the idea that we have multiple hierarchically organized windows, and that the windows are communicating with each other through cross-frequency coupling, where you basically have rhythms that are overlapping in harmonic manners. So this model invites you to take a look at the paper that came out in Neuroscience of Consciousness. But what today I'd like to do is to integrate that model with another paper that came out in Possibility Studies and Society called The Three Dimensions of Time. And this is a even more speculative model that tries to introduce some ideas about how to relate consciousness to physical reality and to some of the issues that have come up in physics. And it ends up speculating on the possibility that there may be, in the same way that we talk about three dimensions of space, there may in fact be three dimensions of time, subjective, objective, and alternative, and I'll unpack those. But let me start by stepping back and inviting you to sort of think about what are the self-evident truths of your own phenomenal existence. What are the things which, if you just popped into existence, they would seem self-evident to you? And this is very much like the the activity that Descartes engaged in when he was imagining demons sort of playing tricks on him. What are the absolutely inescapable, or essentially the axioms of our experience? And I want to argue there are four. This is, again, with Justin. But interestingly, there are sort of these four axioms, although I find them all axiomatic, I actually hold them in decreasing level of absolute certainty. So the first one is absolutely certain, the next one is nearly certain, and so on. The last one is a little bit more marginal. Okay, so the first one is experience happens, that experience exists. I might be a brain in a vat, I could be in a simulation, but I'm having a experience. The second one is experience is necessarily a unfolding. It's one moment after another moment after another moment. That experience could be the exact same experience, but it's happening in a succession of outcroppings of flow. The third is that experience is always in the now. I might be remembering the past, I could be imagining the future, but I'm always doing that in some circumscribed period, which we refer to as now. And then the final one, and I admit that this one is a little bit less certain for me, but it's very compelling, is that experience is impacted by our decisions. I'm able to direct my attention over here. I'm able to direct my attention over there. It's an absolutely fundamental aspect of experience, is the sense of control. What's interesting is that these four self-evident truths have no place currently in mainstream science. So the occurrence of experience itself is the hard problem of consciousness. I don't have to tell this group that we've made very little progress on that. And there's a lot of people who are illusionists who essentially argue that consciousness itself is an illusion. Daniel Dennett was among them. The flow of time, you may not appreciate this, but in physics, the flow of time is considered an illusion as well. As Paul Davies said, nothing in known physics corresponds to the passage of time. Indeed, physicists insist that time doesn't flow at all, it merely is. We experience a flow of time, and yet somehow that's an illusion. The present is also considered an illusion. As Albert Einstein famously said, people like us who believe in physics know that the distinction between past, present, and future is only a stubbornly persistent illusion. And then finally, of course, science has long dismissed free will as being an illusion. You have the illusion of free will, but in fact the illusion comes about because you just don't know the future. So, and of course the notion of free will seems to be against notions of causality, making consciousness some sort of primary cause. So let's first ask the question, why do physicists reject the flow of time and the privileged present? Why do they think this, the experience of now is an illusion? And the answer has to do with something known as the block universe, which comes out of relativity theory, in which it's basically time is treated as another dimension of space. And so the past, the present, and the future are all just different locations in this block universe. That means that you are in every moment, past, present, and future, and so there's not a degree of freedom for you to move through the block universe. So this is the way that you experience an event, but in the block universe, all those different moments are all there simultaneously lined up together, so there's no way to move through it. They're all already there. So herein lies the rub. Science provides absolutely no way of conceptualizing the four most self-evident aspects of experience, of existence: experience, the flow of time, the uniqueness of now, and free will. And we argue that this means that we should maybe just relax our assumptions a little bit and think about, are there other ways of thinking about these aspects that might be able to integrate into mainstream physics? So it suggests the need for scientific humility, and it raises the likelihood that we'll need to find a place for subjectivity in its foundation. So how might we do this? What's missing in the current view that might enable us to introduce subjectivity into the mix? And our claim is that a critical thing that's missing from it is the degree of freedom to move through the block universe. Because time has already been used as one of the dimensions, there's no degree of freedom to move through it. We need an extra dimension. So perhaps we need to postulate the possibility of additional dimensions of time. And through the introduction of additional dimensions of time, this may enable consciousness to move through physical time. So let me show you what I mean here. First, I'm positing the idea of an additional dimension of time, which may seem like a really outlandish thing, but if you think about it, it's very intuitive to think about we have chronologic time. That ticks along with absolute regularity, but then subjective time does not tick along with objective time. Sometimes time goes fast, sometimes time goes slow. Sometimes we don't have any experience of time at all. For example, when we're under anesthesia. When we're in an accident, time seems to go very slow and so on. So this notion that there's a subjective time which is different from objective time and could be thought of as somewhat orthogonal dimensions seems, I think, more intuitive than it might be at first blush. So if we introduce the possibility of a subjective dimension, so now we can move through objective time relative to subjective time, and that allows us then to move through the block universe. Let's see, that should.
You come back to it.
Okay, thanks. Okay, so let me introduce you to a diagrammatic way of doing this. So I introduced you to the block universe before, and in the block universe, before we had physical space reduced from 3 dimensions to 2 dimensions, here I've reduced it just down to 1 dimension. And so we've got physical space and objective time. And here's the observer. And notice the observer is in every moment simultaneously. So there's no way for the observer to have a flow of time because they're everywhere simultaneously. But if we introduce a subjective time dimension, now the observer has an extent in subjective time relative to objective time and can actually move through objective time relative to subjective time. So by introducing an additional dimension, that provides successive moments of now. So this gives us a now, and it also gives us a flow of time. We can also relate this to the block universe. So here, each different moment in subjective relative to objective time corresponds to another frame in the block universe. So by introducing this additional dimension, we're now able to move through objective time. And then you can also imagine different observers who have a different frame rate. So this relates very much to your model. Different frame rates. Some have a faster flicker rate, and they're maybe with less information in every frame, and others have a larger extent in every frame, but they are taking slower steps. So it allows us also to have multiple observers moving through subjective relative to objective time at different rates. Okay, so I've promised you 3 dimensions, and so far I've only given you 2, subjective, objective. What might be the third dimension? And here I want to suggest the possibility of alternative time. Now this relates in some ways to many worlds theory of physics, in which an interpretation, and this has become an increasingly prevalent interpretation of quantum effects, is a splitting universe. And essentially, you maybe have heard about the cat, where in one version the cat is alive and the other cat, the version is dead. And according to this model, the universe is constantly splitting. So you find a dead cat. One version of you finds a dead cat, and another version of you finds a live cat. And this is actually the most unparsimonious model ever invented, because the universe is constantly splitting off into multiple universes constantly. At the same time, it does sort of work mathematically. So the intriguing possibility is that perhaps at every next moment there are multiple possible alternative, sort of an implicate order, but we only go down one of the different branches. So the alternative is that essentially you're imagining this observer window, and it's able to rotate in alternative time and in one way or the other choose between the different tracks. So this then provides the possibility that consciousness could to some degree select between alternative futures and thereby providing room for free will. Okay, so this then leads to a model of 3 dimensions of time in which, we're doing pretty good, in which we've got a subjective time, and we've arbitrarily aligned the time dimensions with spatial dimensions, but this works for now. Invite you to try different variations of it. So basically we're making subjective going up, objective going forward and an alternative going left and right. So it's a little, you can imagine you've got this window which is basically able to rotate in these three things. And so basically here's a window here. The more the window is having a steep, the more it's sort of leaning back, the more steps it's having in subjective time relative to objective time, and so time goes slower. The more it's leaning forward, it's going slower in subjective time relative to objective time, and so that might be something like having a very deep conversation, whereas leaning back is like having a car accident, and then left and right is choosing between different alternative times. And then we can build in the nested observer window model into this, where we have the apex at the top. The apex, as Justin was arguing, is going slowest, and ideally it would be facing sort of the least tilt, and then all the lower ones are having different angles. And then you can also imagine that the slower ones are actually, the lower level windows are actually ahead in objective time relative to the back window, and that explains how we're able to integrate all the information. So all the low-level systems have to make their judgments and experiences before the back one makes its final resolution. Okay, time for our final. No, we got 2 more metaphors to go, and 4 minutes to do it. Okay, so right now we have the windows moving through time. But instead of having the windows moving through time, we can switch it and instead imagine time moving through the windows. And so this is like going up a down escalator. Time is basically coming at you. You're staying still, but time is coming through you, and you're basically shifting your angle in time. And so this notion, if we now take all these windows and have time moving through them instead of them moving through time, that brings us to the kite of consciousness. So this is basically the notion that we have essentially all the windows are all fixed together. They're sort of tethered together, and you can imagine time is like the wind blowing past them, and each one of them has its own degree of freedom to be able to move, but the whole kite is nevertheless moving as a whole. And we're still working on the graphical depiction of this, but this is a first presentation of that. Let's see if this will move. It should. Oh, yeah, here we go. Oh, there we go. Okay, so here you can see the flashing, the lowest level is flashing the fastest, corresponding to the faster frequency, and then it's got the most steep angle, so it has more of an angle in subjective time relative to objective time. Time is moving through it. We can do that one more time. And in principle, each one of those different windows has its own degree of rotation in alternative time, and each one is integrating from up to the next levels up. So we're sort of working on this model, but essentially the idea is that all of these different windows are tethered together. Each one has its own potentially independent axis in alternative time, which allows it to basically integrate a tremendous amount of information and flexibility. So some of the key additional speculations of this final metaphor of the kite of consciousness is first, rather than us moving through time, time is moving through us. Secondly, the windows are all tethered, so that even though we're all moving together, we all have some impact on one another. And potentially the movement of every window impacts the movement of the entire substructure. So even an individual window is influencing the entire kite structure. And in principle, each one of us, so far we've been treating each one of us as the apex, but of course each one of us could be a pixel and yet a larger level window, or we could be essentially all part of this giant kite, all tethered together, and so the movement of each one of us may be influencing the movement of the entire kite of consciousness. And indeed, like I said, even though we're sort of thinking of ourselves as the apex, we might not be the highest level. There could be apex above us, but that apex shouldn't get too full of itself because it could be just a pixel and yet a higher level apex. So there's a sort of intrinsic humility to this model. And it is interesting to note that there's a sort of fractal quality to the universe where nerve cells and galaxy clusters show a substantial resemblance. So, in summary, I introduced I re-summarized the now model, which had the metaphors of windows, conscious experience defined by synchrony, conversations between windows. Windows at the same level communicate by coherence. The mosaic photograph. Windows are nested and communicate up and down the hierarchy through cross-frequency coupling. And then additional metaphors, 3 dimensions of time, which correspond to the 3 dimensions of space. Windows move through 3 dimensions of time, objective, subjective, and alternative, analogous to the 3 dimensions of time. I suggested going up a down elevator rather than us moving through time. Time is moving through us. And lastly, the kite of consciousness. A consciousness can be thought of as a multi-panel kite with objective time likened to the wind passing through it. Thank you all for your attention. I'd like to acknowledge various co-authors who are here, my various affiliations, and grant support. And I'd welcome questions if we have any time. Yeah, in the back there.
Thank you very much. I'm Radar from Finland, and at Aalto University, we're formalizing memetics, rebooting it essentially, so that it finally becomes a formalized discipline. And as a part of that work, it's quite clear that the structures that we're modeling, since it's purely formal, I mean, it's abstract. It's about abstract representations. Out of that works come very clearly highly compatible thinking with what you're doing. I love your poetic approach, and I've never seen anyone talk about this quite like this, but just purely formally and structurally is exactly what memetics is about as well, because just shortly, it's of course about the fact that we have the world out here, and inside ourselves we have representations. Whatever we have here is in here because it's represented abstractly inside us somehow. Now, out of that, of course, comes the fact that the space, the state space or space of representations can easily accommodate, and actually, without going into details again, it almost presupposes the fact that it has its own time. So there's nothing weird or odd or exceptional. I think it's quite logical and natural. And then finally, that of course neatly conforms to the fact that there are forces in that space. For example, if we feel attraction, then that's in my mind. It's not like my body in this physical space is suddenly drawn to another person physically. Something happens in my mind, but there are forces. There is attraction, repulsion, etc. in that space, and that presupposes time and forces, etc. So it all neatly falls into place. Just saying out that. So super interesting stuff, and I'd love to talk more.
Yeah, terrific. Let's talk about them more. I just would want to add that oftentimes I'm treating these dimensions as metaphors, but the real agenda is to have people take seriously that there's an ontological reality to these, that this is not just sort of a metaphor for, or that subjective time is not just sort of a metaphor where objective time is the real thing, but they actually are ontologically on par, if not actually subjective time having the upper hand, because we absolutely have, we know that subjective time passes. We don't even really know about physical time.
I got that. I'm not there yet, but when we talk more,
right.
Perhaps I'll be there.
And I'm not there. I'm entertaining that too. But we'll go with Arno.
I have a question about the free will. So in the hierarchy, it's like only apex has free will, but now there's something about the apex.
Everyone.
So if everyone has free will,
yeah,
and there's like almost infinite hierarchy, then nobody has free will, right?
No. So basically, the idea is that in the most sort of extreme, radical version of it, the idea is that every individual window has consciousness and has free will and maybe some other imperatives like curiosity and valence and preference. And each individual window is making its little turn in every moment, and that then influences what the next level up gets. So the decisions of the lower level windows are then impacting the decisions of the next level windows and impacting the decisions of the next level windows. And those then are shifting and impacting back and forth. So everybody has free will in the kite of consciousness. Yeah.
Possibly a short question, but why do you have a preference of time moving through us versus us moving through time?
They're actually, so in one sense, it's sort of an arbitrary thing. But in the other sense, and this is something that I need to work through with someone with more mathematical skills than me, the idea is that each one of the individual windows has got its own axis in alternative time. And then if we're all tethered together and time is moving through us, but each individual one has its own axis, then it actually introduces multiple degrees of freedom for alternative time in all the different systems, whereas if we're moving through time, then each one would have to scatter out in its different directions. So having time move through us allows us all to stay tethered together and potentially have additional freedom in this alternative time dimension.
All right, I'm going to cut it off for the sake of time, but if the speakers can hang around a little bit and answer additional questions. So thank you all for your attendance.
Yes, yeah. I was just right. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's good to see you.